mafuna ndipeleke chimene Mungu andipasa. Chiambire parena pano. Ndambe ndalembapo zinthu mapepala. Amakhala ndwa. Amakhala awaiti. Amakhala white. Amati ndiyankhule chifukwa cha munthu wina wochulidwa mfumu Farao amene akwezeka pa Genesis 41 kuyambira pa 1 kulekeza 57. Amati ndiyankhule chifukwa cha mfumu Nebukadneza amene akwezeka pa Danieli 2 kuyambira pa 1 kulekeza pa 49. Ndiye Mulungu amati ndifunsefunso ziko lapansi kuyambirira mapresidenti aziko lapansi. Ali kuti wanthu angati Farao, ali kuti wanthu angati Nebukadneza amene akaona nyengo ndi zinthu mene zikuyendera sana zimvesese amathamangira kwa Mulungu. Zikoma amalakwisa amapitanso kwa openduza ndi asing'anga koma amachitabe chanzera mukafika kwa prophet osiyana-siyana kuti awauze chinthu chili chani asanapange china chilichonse. Ali kuti anzeru ngati izi. Haleluya. 2020 Mulungu ananenera kale kuyambira 2019 kumapeto zonse zilipo komana amati ndi fotokozere anandiyitana anati Emmanuel tabwera ndiye ndinabwera kuno. Ndiye anati Emmanuel mati ndiyankhulane nawe wauze wanthu pa dziko lapansi mavuto aliko ndithu. Osati mavuto aliko koma mavuto aliko ndithu. Haleluya. Ndiye amanena kuti ndiononga ndi mvula ndiononga pena paliponse. Ndiononga ndi mvula ya mphepo. Ndiye amati ndiononga ndi matenda. Ndiononga ineyo Mulungu amatero. Ndiononga ndi moto. Ndiononga kuziko lapansi maudani ochuluka maiko anthu akubuza malo moti apange mtendere. Pamene apanga mtendereyo mavuto ndi pamene azikuyakuliabe. Pamene akuti nditese izizi zigawenga izizi za uchifwamba wati watese amene titane nawo ndi pamene azingokula-kulabe iwo mphamvu. Akuti kufikira wanthu aziko lapansi ataganiza chikuchitika ndi chani ndipo zimene zikutheka bwanji. Ndi amati anthu awa wauze amazona ngati ndi anzeru. Iwo amazona ndi anzeru. Ndiye ndiwathesa nzeru zawo. Chifukwa akuisa ntchito chonse chimene angafune kuti akonze chinthu malo mokonza chizingoonongeka china chilichonse. Ndiye nzeru zawo zitha andifuna ineyo. Ine ndimadziwika anthu nzeru zawo zikawatha ndipani amatiziwa. Ndiye wauze angoziwa chifukwa cha maonene onse amene nakupasa. Ndiononga ndi mvula ndiononga pena paliponse. Ndiononga ndi mvula ya mphepo.
Record flooding in Sudan is damaging infrastructure and essential water supply is at risk of being contaminated. The United Nations says that this natural disaster is preventing people from adhering to measures that protect against COVID-19.
Record floods in Sudan have devastated infrastructure, the United Nations has warned, cutting off humanitarian access and preventing people from taking measures to protect against COVID-19. Dozens have died and thousands of homes have been destroyed after heavy rains triggered severe flooding and a rise of the River Nile by up to nearly 17.5 meters, the highest level in 100 years, according to Sudanese authorities.
Two lakes in Kenya are rising with possibilities of merging due to heavy rainfalls. Locals classify this as an ecological disaster.
The fresh waters of Kenya's Lake Baringo teem with birds, fish, hippos and crocodiles and sustain tens of thousands of people. but none of them can survive in the alkaline Lake Bogoria nearby. Now heavy rainfall and ecological destruction means the two lakes are rising and may merge. The flooding's driving farmers from their land and residents from their homes. Local camp manager James Oua.
All my life started from here. It is quite disgusting to see a place you call home for most of your time going.
Locals say it will be an ecological disaster if the two lakes meet. Baringo, which irrigates land and provides drinking water, has expanded 60%, according to the government-run Kenya Wildlife Service. Lake Bogoria has swollen by a quarter to 16 square miles. Conservationists said the rising waters are due to a combination of unusually heavy rains and the silting up of the lakes.
Until next time, bye-bye.
Sounding the alarm, India's National Disaster Response Force warned people in the state of West Bengal ahead of cyclone Amphan making landfall. The storm brought heavy rain and strong winds, uprooting trees. More than 500,000 people have been evacuated to emergency shelters in West Bengal and another 150,000 in the state of Odisha. Bangladesh is evacuating around 2 million people.
Many people have come to the shelter since morning because the river's banks have broken down. Here, most of the houses aren't made of concrete and bricks. People here live in basic structures out of mud.
Emergency authorities say Amphan will be harder to manage as they try to stop the spread of the coronavirus.
पहली बार हुआ है कि एक तरह से दो डिजास्टर्स हम लोग एक साथ फेस कर रहे हैं.
We are dealing with two disasters for the first time. The first disaster is ongoing, COVID-19, which you all know about. And during this outbreak, another disaster is now in front of us, which is in the form of a cyclone.
Emergency shelters are only being used at half capacity. While East India and Bangladesh are in the storm's path, heavy rain and flooding from Amphan killed 2 people in Sri Lanka. Those living in coastal areas have been warned against leaving their homes until the cyclone passes. Elizabeth Puranam, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Okay, finish.
Nakatayo na yung Christmas tree namin, may ilaw na. Tapos wala, sira. Na ano ang Pasko namin. Nasira ang aming Pasko. Pero okay lang namang importante sa amin, iligtas yung kaming lahat.
with force and fury.
Wow, this hurricane is no joke.
Hurricane Sally made landfall along the coast of Alabama just after 6 a.m., bringing some of the Gulf of Mexico with it.
No idea where that boat came from.
The storm hit the coast as a Category 2 hurricane, packing sustained winds of more than 165 kilometers an hour.
My wife was just crying because she never seen this before too, and my kids were scared, and I told them it was going to be okay.
The storm knocked out power lines, leaving more than 500,000 people in Alabama and Florida in the dark. The wind was powerful enough to tip over this tractor trailer. Luckily, the driver wasn't seriously hurt. In Gulf Shores, Alabama, roadways became waterways. Buildings in low-lying areas were flooded, while some high-rises had walls ripped away. In Pensacola, Florida, part of this bridge is now gone. Where it wasn't wind, it was rain. In some areas, the storm was expected to drop anywhere from 60 to 90 centimeters of rain.
I will tell you it's bad. It's going to take a considerable amount of time to clean up from this.
In one neighborhood, the floodwater brought an unwanted visitor.
Oh my God, this is outside of our window. It is a 10 or 12 foot alligator.
The high water conditions also made it difficult for emergency crews to help those who tried to ride out the storm.
Because of the high winds, because of the amount of flooding that we're seeing, where responders right now are having to stage because it's so dangerous.
In one Florida county, more than 100 people were rescued.
We'll either get a boat out there to pick you up or a high water vehicle. We anticipate the evacuations could literally be in the thousands.
Sally has been downgraded, but as it lurches towards the Carolinas, the rain continues to fall, and millions are still at risk from potential floods. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.
COVID-19, the disease that defined our lives in 2020.
2020 is now the deadliest year in U.S. history.
Since late March, the U.S. has led the world with the most cases and the most deaths, now at more than 334,000. What began as a faraway outbreak in China.
There is growing concern at this hour over a possible outbreak of a mystery virus.
Whenever we hear this is new, we haven't seen this before, we have no history on this pathogen, hairs stand on edge.
Tonight, authorities confirm it is being spread from human to human.
Off the coast of Japan, a quarantined cruise ship became a hotspot.
More than 200 people with the virus on board this cruise ship.
The Diamond Princess saw the biggest cluster of cases outside of China.
And Italy became the European epicenter.
Down this road here, these are the 12 towns which are on lockdown. We've been told actually if we go over this line, we'll end up in quarantine ourselves.
I remember going back and forth a couple of times and thinking, well, Italy's not managed to get the handle on this, you know, but it can't possibly get much bigger than Italy.
Showing us the shocking reality of the virus's lethal strength.
Have you been briefed by the CDC? Are there words about a pandemic at this point?
No, we're not at all, and we have it totally under control.
We begin tonight with breaking news, the first death from coronavirus here in the United States.
The CDC is sending a team here to Washington State to help investigate a potential outbreak among the high-risk population at this nursing home.
In the greatest country in the world, you know, to slowly watch infirm elderly people be picked off by a deadly disease, it's unacceptable. Tonight, the first containment zone here in America. Restrictions on a community just outside New York City, linked to the largest cluster of cases in the country.
It wasn't a question of if, but when. This is New York. We're a gateway to the world.
Days after the virus hit New York, on March 11th, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic, the first pandemic since H1N1 in 2009.
It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
It changed our lives almost immediately and all at once.
All of a sudden, I started getting these alerts. Rudy Gobert tested positive.
The NBA is suspending its season indefinitely after a player tested positive.
That really sort of kicked off this global shutdown, if you will.
That was the moment when people realized this is serious, this is a pandemic.
And then it seemed like
The reach of the virus kind of touched us immediately when we heard that Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson had both tested positive.
The virus will not have a chance against us. No nation is more prepared or more resilient than the United States.
New York City's mayor calling the city the epicenter of the spread in the U.S. Now more than 12,000 confirmed cases, 35% of all cases in the country.
Pretty much the entire emergency department's a hot zone at this point.
Tonight, with the U.S. now leading the world in the highest number of people testing positive for coronavirus, surpassing Italy and China. Hospitalizations doubling every 4 days now.
Morgue space is filling up. This grim picture outside Bellevue Hospital. About a dozen of these refrigerator trucks lined up to hold the dead.
The nation tried to slow the spread with White House and CDC guidelines to stay at home.
15 days to slow the spread.
As we come on the air tonight, much of America shutting down.
And then to cover our faces.
New CDC guidelines recommending the wearing of masks in public. It's going to be really a voluntary thing. You can do it. You don't have to do it. I'm choosing not to do it.
Just cover your face because you may be infected with coronavirus, unknowingly have no symptoms and spread it to others. More patients crowding hospitals meant a shortage of critical personal protective equipment for healthcare workers on the front lines.
Where are we on that personal protective equipment that we know so many healthcare providers need?
They are in critical condition. They are, in some cases, using rain ponchos, garbage bags for gowns. Their masks are in critically low supply. And following battles to reopen businesses.
We're tired of not being able to buy the things that we need, go to the hairdressers, get our hair done. It's time to open up.
If you don't want to go back to work, don't go back to work. But don't deny the rest of us the ability to go back to work.
Surges of cases as the virus spread across the South.
There are parts of this country that are still late to this pandemic.
Across the country, COVID-19 has taken a disproportionate toll on already vulnerable communities that have struggled for decades with access to health care.
Black and Latino communities are disproportionately affected not only by COVID, but by multiple other infections and by multiple other chronic diseases.
These things, as we know, contribute to why African Americans disproportionately are suffering from COVID more than other populations.
Another part of this country in dire need, Navajo Nation, where there are almost no medical facilities at all. The largest hospital nearby is already at capacity.
We are essential workers, much more likely to be essential workers. We have to be out there in the pandemic.
The virus tightened its grip across the nation with a third wave hitting every U.S. state by early fall. And as we entered our darkest days,
we're at a breaking point.
So many hospitals are already at or near capacity. That's why this surge tent is being built.
California hasn't seen anything like this in years. More of the state burning this week than an entire wildfire season. Firefighters are struggling to cope with the calls for help.
All right, guys, I'm gonna get you out of here, okay? All right.
These men needed rescuing after becoming trapped. A rare storm saw more than 12,000 lightning strikes, igniting more than 500 wildfires across the state. Then high winds and high temperatures turned some into infernos. 6 lives have been lost and 700 properties destroyed already. And as the fires threaten more populated areas,
blankets, clothes, the necessities.
100,000 people are under evacuation orders.
5 years back, there was no fires every year. And now it seems like every year is record fires every year.
Firefighters are barely sleeping as they work to contain the fires ahead of another lightning storm. But thick smoke is hindering firefighting from the air.
This isn't just a typical fire that we face day in, day out. This is unprecedented. This is historic.
The fires are growing so fast, many are too dangerous to approach. With relentless high temperatures and high winds, this is only expected to get worse. Peak wildfire season is still weeks away. And right now, there's no end in sight. Sally Lockwood, Sky News, Los Angeles.
It's piqued my anxiety to, 200% higher than it was 24 hours ago. If the structure can be saved, it will be because fire officials are up there doing it. It won't be because of luck. I don't think we have luck on our side anymore.
It's within miles right now. We're near the river, and we've taken we did a lot of wildfire mitigation in the last couple of years. We're feeling not too bad, but you never know.
We really don't know what's going on. I know the people that are working on this fire are some of the best in the business. I think things are going to be okay, but if we get another wind event like that, you never know what could happen.
Clearly, you can see with the fuel moisture conditions and the fire at this particular location with the slopes and the topography, it really created a recipe for rapid fire growth.
2020 shattering records around the world for some of the wildest weather ever recorded.
Deadly wildfire raging up and down the West Coast.
Go, go, go! More than 10 million acres charred, mostly in California, Colorado, and the Pacific Northwest.
What's happening with fires in the West right now is exactly what has been predicted with climate change. The atmosphere is hotter and drier. Hey, time to move the hose line up!
Fire crews battling walls of flames.
I've been covering fires for half a dozen years or more. I've never seen anything like this. The sky completely orange.
Julieta Carlos says she's never seen anything like the recent attack on her village in Mozambique by an armed group in all of the 79 years she's been alive.
We saw our houses burned and they started beheading people. We ran away. Our home is far from here and it took us about 2 weeks to get here.
Now she's among hundreds hoping to find food and shelter here at a centre for displaced people near the town of Pemba. Everyone tells similar stories. Musa Asane says the fighters abducted many children. He was lucky to escape with his.
They wouldn't let us leave. Then they took us to a school and read out our names. Then they beheaded them with a machete while everyone was watching.
The attackers are from armed groups who say they want to create an Islamic State. Their attacks on the mainly Muslim population began sporadically 3 years ago. This year they've grown stronger, occupying some towns in Cabo Delgado province. For nearly 2 months, they've controlled the port town of Mocimboa de Praia. Mozambique's armed forces have steadily lost ground to the armed groups. Military support from the European Union and funding from the US are both being discussed, but nothing's been finalised yet. Securing the coastal gas extraction facilities might be possible. Securing the 2 million people who live across the province will be much more difficult. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera.
Several hundred schoolboys kidnapped in northern Nigeria last Friday have arrived in their state capital after being freed from the neighbouring state where it's thought they were held by gunmen in a forest. The boys, all 344 of them, according to the governor of Katsina, will be visited by doctors before being reunited with their families. Boko Haram said they carried out these abductions, but Nigerian government officials are blaming criminal gangs, possibly with some connection to the Islamist militants. Well, Boko Haram has become notorious over the last decade for school kidnappings. The group's name loosely translates as Western education is forbidden. So let's take a look now at the wider picture. In April 2014, Boko Haram kidnapped 276 girls from their school in Chibok in Borno State, and around 100 of those girls are still missing. That abduction and others up to now have taken place in northeastern Nigeria, where Boko Haram is based. But despite its claim now, the Nigerian government says the Katsina abduction was carried out by local gangs, perhaps connected to the Islamist group. Armed attacks and kidnappings are rife in northwestern Nigeria and often blamed on bandits, a loose term for the gangs operating in the area. Amnesty International says more than 1,100 people were killed by bandits in the first 6 months of this year, with the government failing to bring the attackers to justice. I've been talking to Shehu Sani, a former senator for Kaduna State in Nigeria and a human rights campaigner who believes it was criminals rather than Boko Haram acting as the main force behind this kidnapping. He believes a ransom was paid to get the boys released. And in your view, these aren't the tactics of Boko Haram?
As you are aware, Boko Haram have been most active in the northeastern part of Nigeria, and they are populated by the Kanuri tribe, and the bandits in the northwestern part of Nigeria are mostly the Fulani tribe. So even with the audio claim of Boko Haram, I never believe it is Boko Haram because it is logistically impossible for Boko Haram to operate in the northeast and the northwest. So the fact that they were released within 48 hours of their kidnap shows that it was the bandits. And certainly if they were the Boko Haram that kidnapped them, that could not have been the situation.
So the government has, in a way, a double challenge. There are different motivations behind the kidnapping of children. What more do you think the government can do to keep children safe?
Well, first of all, what they have done for the meantime is the best, to close down the schools and then take active measures in terms of protecting students.
The murder of a 22-year-old white woman has sparked off racial tensions in South Africa. The protests remind people of the country's apartheid past. The truth, however, is far more complex than it seems. Our report tells you more.
Anti-apartheid chants and the old South African anthem, both remnants of a brutal and painful history. The murder of a young white farm worker sparked a tense standoff between the farmers on the one hand and supporters of a far-left political party on the other in the small town of Senekal in South Africa's agricultural heartland. Scattered groups of people hurled threats at each other in the streets around the court where two accused appeared for Brendan Horner's murder.
We are not here to talk, we are here to show physically enough is enough.
Julius Malema, leader of the leftist opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, had a similar message as he addressed a large crowd behind the court.
We are here because white arrogance displayed itself on this street. We were here to confront it toe to toe.
White interest groups claim that white farmers are targeted because of their race, but the government says it is as a result of criminality. The Institute for Security Studies, a respected African think tank, highlights that farm attack victims are from all race groups.
Good evening, Brigadier. So
This was the first court appearance of these two men accused of the murder of Brendan Horner. Could you just tell us what they were charged with, what happened in court, before we get to the drama of what happened outside court?
After the adjournment, the police took the two accused to the court cells. Unfortunately, after some time, the group of farmers stormed into the court building, whereby some of the furniture and property of the court was damaged. And on the other side, we decided to deploy other members outside, but unfortunately, one of the police vehicles was overturned and it was burned and damaged badly. And the police reinforced other forces to come and join them just to bring the situation under control, and they managed to put all this group of farmers which was inside the court building to take them outside so that they can remove the accused who were in the court cells to the place where they were detained.
There have been clashes outside a South African high school where people are protesting against racism. The demonstrators accuse the establishment of discriminating against black students. Now, tear gas was used outside the Cape Town school, which allegedly held a graduation event where only white pupils and teachers attended. The school denies this and says that the function was private. Famida Miller has more from near the school in Cape Town.
A number of EFF members, about 2,000 of them in fact, tried to move closer to the school. You'll see behind me, they're now behind a police barricade, but to keep them back, police once again fired tear gas and stun grenades. Have also used water cannon to prevent these protesters from approaching the school. They say only 500 protesters are or would be allowed through, and this is why we see this police barricade and this heavy police presence. Protesters here have in fact been quite peaceful, and they've also accused police of being heavy-handed. They're also, apart from targeting the school, they're also angry with police, saying that they're racist and they wouldn't respond in the same manner to white protesters, or if marches were white, it wouldn't be the same scenario. So people here are angry. And ultimately, the target is Brackenfell High School, which they accuse of racism. This goes back to a function that was held, a year-end function for final year students. Once the official dance, an end-of-year function, was cancelled by the school because of COVID-19 restrictions, it appears as if students had their own private function. This is what the school is saying. But there are black students at the school who say they've been discriminated against, and none of them were invited to this function. They weren't allowed to attend. We've also heard a number of former and present students say that this goes back years, and this is a school where there's been a lack of integration, a lack of black teachers, and there's a greater problem of racism at the school. The school has denied that, but has also admitted that some work has to be done, in that they're now listening to how black students feel.
Well, certainly much more remains to be done, and the great work that was done by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission at the end of apartheid in 1994 was perhaps it did not go far enough in ensuring accountability. There was truth-telling, but perhaps not so much about accountability and ensuring that the divisions, the inequalities are resolved once and for all. So there is need for the ANC and other political parties in South Africa to take race issues very seriously, and the steps that require to be taken to heal South Africa and make it truly a rainbow nation and not just at the level of rhetoric.
Another massacre in the town of Mangina in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Allied Democratic Forces, a rebel group, is being blamed for carrying out an ambush, attacking victims with machetes and guns.
Right now there are 12 bodies being buried at Makusa, and 12 people are missing or have been kidnapped by the ADF Ugandan rebels.
Family members are angry and frustrated.
We are worried about the situation all the time. There seems to be no end. The government needs to come to our aid. It's lasted for years. We've had enough.
Mangina is an area that's been exposed to the Ebola outbreak since 2018. The latest attack has forced shops and markets to close. Only soldiers and aid workers patrol the streets. Panicked residents are packing whatever they can carry and leaving to find safety. Many were uprooted from their homes before. They're now heading 30 kilometers east towards the town of Beni, between North Kivu and Ituri provinces.
My father's body is in this coffin. He was killed with a machete by ADF rebels while farming. We managed to get parts of his body so that we can go back and bury him in the village.
But Beni has come under frequent attack with hundreds of people killed. It's also facing a major threat of Ebola. Treatment centers have been destroyed and authorities are struggling to control this volatile region.
The Ebola outbreak in Mangina was getting under control, but in Beni it is still active. Now with the mass movement of people from Mangina to Beni, there are some who have not been taken care of. Also, the rebels can take advantage of this with more attacks.
But for many trying to escape violence and a health epidemic, the road to peace and security looks more uncertain. Rahila Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
They traveled more than 1,000 kilometers to find jobs in one of the most dangerous places to live and work in Niger. They ended up in the hands of Boko Haram, bound and then slaughtered. 43 victims laid to rest in this cemetery.
Dead bodies here. Up to now, there are some bodies that are yet to be recovered from the bush. Indeed, it is a frightening situation.
Search is being carried out for dozens of hours. Most doctors. 6 survivors have been treated as the state government is turning to
We shall ensure more recruitment of civilian jets of this area.
The farm workers were contracted to harvest crops some 25 kilometers away from the city of Maiduguri. The manner they were killed suggests the attackers were careful not to attract attention. Last month, the armed group killed 22 farmers in 2 separate attacks outside the regional capital, Maiduguri.
The president has issued a statement condemning the recent attack. But after a decade of such raids by Boko Haram and the ongoing ethnic violence, kidnappings and robberies, many Nigerians say the government is not doing enough to protect them.
The United Nations resident representative issued a statement condemning the attack, saying many women had also been abducted. An estimated 36,000 Nigerians have been killed by Boko Haram over the past 11 years, and more than 2.5 million have been displaced. This latest is one of the worst since the start of the Boko Haram insurgency that was launched 12 years ago and has now spread to neighboring Chad, Cameroon, and Niger, where thousands of civilians and security personnel have been killed. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Abuja.
Mozambique is turning to the European Union for help to stop attacks by ISIL-linked groups in its northern region. The president wants the EU to train its forces to battle armed groups which emerged 3 years ago in Cabo Delgado. Since then, the fighters have stepped up the violence, seizing important towns and targeting the military. From Nairobi, Malcolm Webb explains the risk that the fighters pose to this region.
The government of Mozambique has asked for what it's described as specialised training and logistics for counter-terrorism forces and also for medical assistance in the combat zone. Mozambique's armed forces have struggled in their fight against the armed groups. Last month, the armed groups took control of the port town of Mocimboa da Praia, and the government forces haven't been able to take the town back since. ISIL has claimed responsibility for some of the attacks that have happened in Cabo Delgado province, although it's not clear how much international support the fighters there actually have.
So concerns are mounting over escalating violence in northern Mozambique. This week, more than 50 people were beheaded in recent attacks by armed groups in the region. Thousands of others have had to flee their home in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique.
You are Jehovah. You are Jehovah. You're the mighty man in battle. You are Jehovah. Jehovah. You are Jehovah. You are the mighty man in battle. You are Jehovah. You're the mighty man of war. You are Jehovah. You are Jehovah.